I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Sarah Morrow, who's the director of the MS Clinic in Calgary. She is also a professor at the University of Calgary in the Department of Clinical Neurosciences. And she comes to us a really illustrious career already, where she came from London, Ontario, where she established the very first clinic for cognition in MS. So it's pretty wonderful that she's come to Calgary to join us and bring all that expertise. And she'll be our moderator for the session.
It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Jodie Roberts. She completed her medical school and neurology residency at the University of Calgary. She's currently a neurologist and assistant professor with us here at the University of Calgary. She completed a MS fellowship at the University of Melbourne and also a master's degree in epidemiology. So she specializes in seeing people with MS, but one of her other areas of interest is autoimmune neurological conditions. And she leads the Clinical Impact of MS study, or CIMS, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight, which is a long-term study that explores how treatments and social factors shape MS outcomes. So her research involves mostly looking at large data sets, and this is where her Master's of Epidemiology really comes in handy. So, Dr. Roberts, I'm really excited to hear your talk tonight.
All right, well, thank you so much for the introduction. And I am going to continue introducing myself for another minute, just to let you know a few personal things about me. This is an intimate evening. I'm really grateful to have all of you here. So yeah, I'm an MS neurologist. I'm also a stepmother to two girls, age 9 and 11. My husband is also a neurologist, and he's an ALS researcher who's currently in Ottawa at Parliament advocating for ALS research. I am a crazy cat lady, and I have two cats named Sammy and Ash. I'm very into pollinator gardens, which is a topic that you better not get me started on. A new niche interest I developed during the pandemic. I'm an avid cross-country skier and cyclist, and my favorite color is green. Okay, so now that we've got ourselves acquainted, let's talk a little bit about the plan for the evening. So I suspect most of you are taking a break from your usual evening plans, whether that be, relaxing in the bath, reading a book, watching TV, maybe enjoying some hot tea, as I still am tonight, or a glass of wine, maybe going for a run or, putting some kids to bed and making dinner. So I just want to say again, I'm so grateful that you have taken the time from your evening to have this conversation with us. Um, you know, some of the hot topics for tonight are simply talking about, why participate in research, who benefits, what it means to consent for a research study. Related to my research area, I'd like to talk a little bit about what registries are and what type of questions we can answer for them. I want to talk about the CIMS registry, which is our local Calgary registry. And then finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about an important research role called being a patient research partner. So starting off, so why participate in research? And sometimes, the answer for this is quite obvious. We're fortunate to host a number of clinical trials here in Calgary where people can have the opportunity to enroll in trials and potentially receive new cutting edge therapies. When you participate in a clinical trial, you also get a lot of extra study visits. You have care providers keeping close tabs on you. There's numerous benefits to clinical trials, and I definitely encourage people to participate in those if they're eligible. But sometimes research doesn't have a clear benefit other than, simply the fact it's an opportunity to help others shape the future and, you know, understanding that really MS research cannot happen without all of you. And, the fact that you're here listening to this talk means that you're already engaged and interested in MS research, which is really phenomenal. And thank you so much. MS research or interest in it can give you opportunities to engage with the larger MS community and get to know some of the researchers and other clinicians working in your area. And, a hidden benefit of MS research that I wanted to make a plug for is how important this can be for the journey of an aspiring MS researcher. Okay, and that is because excited students are really future MS researchers and neurologists. So you'll see me here, circa 2010, have a very dramatic millennial side part, as you can see. And this is me participating in my first ever research project when I was an undergraduate student. And for me, this opportunity was life-changing. I don't think this moment captures how excited I was to be standing by my poster. I had this opportunity. I got to fly to San Antonio, Texas, which to me, it was my first time leaving Canada. And I had a chance to meet all these researchers and doctors, and I was just so inspired by them and the difference that they made and their clear passion for their work. And that sort of set me on, a 15-year trajectory to where I am now, working as an MS researcher and neurologist. And not only did that opportunity get me excited, it also gave me opportunities. So I'm going to be honest that the project that you see me standing in front of, it wasn't, probably didn't change anyone's life other than the fact it changed my life because it gave me a chance to, I had a research project. So then, other people were willing to do research for me. They wrote reference letters for me. They got me into medical school. I got awards to conduct research in my master's degree. And the way things work in kind of this research world is if you have a small success, they start piling on and the opportunities grow. And so, please keep that in mind if you have a chance to participate in even a small study that um, doesn't may not seem that exciting. It could be very exciting for that person, and down the road, it could produce, a fantastic MS neurologist or researcher. I just wanted to include the picture of two students that are working with me right now that I think are probably going to be future MS neurologists and researchers. Miriam Zidan, who is an undergraduate neuroscience student doing research on the social determinants of health in MS, and I'll tell you more about that work later. And then another neurosciences student named Rita Tariq, who's working with me on a project studying people with pediatric onset MS and the transition from pediatric to adult care. Okay, so now that I've got, you're excited, you're ready to participate in research, I'm going to explain kind of a few logistical things that are happening in the clinic right now. So if you've visited the MS clinic in the past few months, you've likely been handed one of these forms. And essentially, these forms are not consent for a specific research project or to engage in research, but consent for us to contact you with future research opportunities. So all this form consists of is a yes or no tick box, and then we ask people to include, their preferred method of contact, be, email, telephone, and as well as to give us consent to update this information using your medical charts. Um, when you complete one of these forms, we essentially, store your name and your contact information in a secure database. And then when new research studies come up, we fire you off an invitation. So, as I mentioned, we just launched this a few weeks ago, and some of you may have received this email from a PhD student named Aaron Pearson, just introducing himself. So he says, "My name is Aaron Pearson. I'm a PhD student at the University of Calgary. And my research looks at how exercise affects how much fatigue people feel throughout the day." And then he explains, who might be eligible. So I'm looking for adults aged 18 to 65 years old to take part in my study. I won't go into too much details. He explains what the study entails, and then just ask you to reach out to him if you're interested in participating in the study. So, you may receive many emails like this once you've signed your consent to contact form. And, if you're not interested, that's no problem at all. No one will know. You can just delete the email along with all your, emails from the Gap or Starbucks. And I know we all get spammed with those emails all the time. No problem. Sometimes it's not the right study for you, or sometimes life is just busy. Just delete the email. Don't feel badly about it. I can't see the chat, but I will mention that I believe Aaron has finished recruiting for this study, and I'd like to thank the group because I understand he had quite an exceptional response to people interested. I'm so grateful for the community here, and please keep your eye out for many opportunities that are still coming. Okay, so I talked about our consent to contact process, which is actually different than research consent itself. So there's, many steps in the process before, we approach you asking to participate in a study. This first bubble here, study design, is arguably what researchers spend the most time on, which is, thinking of a research question, thinking about the best way to understand it, or to try and answer that question, and then planning and the design for this study. Once that's done, then the next step is we actually submit a very detailed description of our plan for the research to our local research ethics board. Every university has one of these. And so they look at this proposal over very carefully because their job is to protect patients and people that are participating in research with the number one goal of seeing that the benefits far outweigh any possible risks. They want to make sure the research proposed is actually feasible. The last thing we want is people dedicating their time, and time is so valuable, to research studies, and then, the study isn't finished and there's no product, and the all those efforts are not helping to move the care of MS forward. So one of the things the Research Ethics Board does is look at, okay, is this a feasible project that someone can get done? Is there money to fund this research, and do the researchers have the skills and experience to conduct this type of study? The other thing they look very carefully at is making sure that your confidentiality is protected. We have to write very clearly about how we're going to de-identify any information, how we're going to store this information in a way that it's not going to be able to be accessed by someone not directly on the research team. And the other thing that the research ethics boards want to see is that these studies are reasonably convenient. We recognize that people are, for the most part, doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, and that is not something that we want to take for granted. And we want to make sure that research is as pain-free as possible. Um, so once the Research Ethics Board has approved a study, then that's the point when we start approaching you for research consent. And there's some components of that are very important. The biggest one, that it needs to be voluntary. So I haven't looked at the list, so I don't know if there's anyone here that I'm their neurologist, but I certainly, there's a reason why I don't ask people when I'm seeing them in clinic to enroll in my research studies. It's really important that people don't ever feel coerced in any way to participate in projects, which is why we, try and keep a reasonable distance between clinical care and research studies. And I'll just say, I certainly don't want anyone that I'm involved in their care to feel pressure to participate in any way. The other really important thing for research consent is that you have enough information to understand why the study is being done, what, we think we're going to learn from it, and how, what's being asked of you. And there should always be opportunities to speak with people of the research team to clarify any questions you have, because it's really important you have that sufficient information. And the other next important thing is with any research study, even ones where you're just, volunteering your information and not actively doing anything, you can withdraw at any time, and you don't need to feel badly about that. So just important to keep in mind is consent is a daily process, and if there's a day you wake up and say, I'm done with this study, no problem, you can withdraw your consent. Okay, so I just want to talk just briefly about the difference between clinical trials and observational studies. So I talked a little bit about trials already, and often when we talk about trials, we're talking about research studies where we're looking at new medications or treatments. Um, and these studies are so important and very exciting to be part of. But we can answer all research questions using clinical trials. And part of the reason for that is that they're very expensive, unfortunately. And because they're expensive, often, they're not very long term. So, most clinical trials will, let's say, for example, it's a treatment, so people get a medication, and then we see how they do, if they get better, worse, stay the same over 6 months to a year or 2 years. So, you know, it's not always obvious how a treatment can change a very long-term outcome. The other thing about clinical trials, which many of you may experience, is that they only include very specific people. So very commonly you'll see a new medication, but only people between the ages of 18 and 50 are able to participate. And they have to have, a certain type of MS and this number of relapses or this number of lesions in the last few years. Um, so they're limiting. We get a lot of interesting information, but it doesn't tell us as much about the long term, and the results may not apply to everyone. And so another area of research that I work in is observational research, where we basically just look at the real world, what's happening in real life. These studies are somewhat less costly and often can include everyone and give us an opportunity to observe people over very long periods of time, even decades. So a very common type of observational research in healthcare is a type of registry, and in this case, I'm talking about MS registries. And so registries collect, a wide range of observed data. So it could be things like clinical history. So when someone was diagnosed with MS, how many relapses they've had, when they were diagnosed, what types of treatments they've been on, where they received their medical care, if it was in an MS clinic or elsewhere, MRI results and MRI pictures themselves, the results of spinal fluid tests if people have had lumbar punctures, the results of blood tests, and then demographic information, things like someone's age or sex, gender, race, ethnicity, the types of jobs they have and their income. And so all of that information can be pooled into a single registry and used to conduct a wide range of research studies. And this is important because registries allow us to collect information on questions that we don't yet know are important. And so, for an example, the many registries were running during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there were a lot of concerns about the safety of different MS treatments during that time period. And most of the information we got about safety was from registries because, people, you know, it captured infections that people were getting in real time. Everyone was already enrolled. We already knew, all of this other information about people. So it's very useful to have these registries because it takes a long time to start a study. So once you're rolling, you're ready for action if new and important questions come up. And so just to talk a little bit about the types of questions we can answer with registry. So as I already mentioned, registries show us the long-term safety of MS medications in real life. And so, sometimes we worry more about the safety of medications when people have been on them for, decades, or when people, are in the later years of life and have more health issues and competing health conditions. And, if we want to understand if medication is safe in the long term and the types of people that aren't usually enrolled in trials, this can be a really useful source of information. Another really important thing about registries is they help us track and understand how the MS journey changes over time. Um, in multiple ways. First, how it changes over time within a given person, but um, you know, it, as we all know, everyone's MS journey is unique. And I give an example of when someone's diagnosed, they could be running, and then 10 years later they're walking, and 20 years later they're using a gait assist such as a cane. But now we're in a new era with many new treatments. And for some people, or even people that were diagnosed a long time ago, it could be that they're, going for daily runs the day they're diagnosed, and they're going for daily runs 20 years later. And if, we follow people in these registries for decades, that's how we can really understand how the average trajectory of MS is changing over time. And we can, have a meaningful conversation when I'm seeing someone in an MS clinic about what they could potentially expect, and I could use the huge number of patients in the registry to say, okay, these are people that are sort of similar to you in terms of the age they were diagnosed, what their MRI showed, how many relapses they had before they received treatment. So it can give us more personalized answers because we can enroll huge numbers of people and study them for a very long time. Another important thing about registries, and I would say this is applicable in Calgary, is they can help us find people eligible for other MS research studies. Definitely it can be the case, I showed you the email from Aaron, the PhD student, that we can just send an email saying, these are the specific people that we're looking for. But especially if we are trying to quickly enroll, for example, someone in a clinical trial, and we need someone that's of a certain ethnicity or in a very narrow age group that has had a certain type of, like, let's say they have had optic neuritis multiple times. We can find those specific people and specifically approach them for studies. And, I think I've said this many times, but the thing about registries is they can help us understand the experience of all people with MS. Um, the goal of registries is to be as inclusive as possible and to capture as many people as possible so we can really understand what MS looks like in the real world.
I don't think so.
And so that brings us to talk about our local Calgary registry called SIMS, or the Clinical Impact of Multiple Sclerosis. I don't know if any of you had the pleasure of ever being cared for by Dr. Luann Metz, who is a neurologist and now politician, who started this registry all the way back in 2002. So, we're at the point that we have people that have been enrolled in this study for over 2 decades, and over 4,000 people have enrolled during that period of time. And so who SIMS includes is very broad. People who are seen in Calgary MS clinics, either at Foothills Medical Center or at South Health Campus. And so I'm going to walk you, SIMS has many components. And so I'm going to walk you through, this is actually directly from our consent form for SIMS, and sort of explain what all these different components mean and the type of information that we'd like to capture. So first, so you'll see here I wrote the role passive. So there's a way to enroll in our registry where we ask you to do absolutely nothing else except for to use your healthcare information. And so that's information from your medical chart, as well as the any pictures taken, like your MRI images for any MRIs that you've had done. And so I'm just going to show you sort of what happens in the clinic and how we collect this information. So yeah, this is a screenshot from a clinic note. So you're probably familiar, you're in the room, you're talking to your neurologist, and they're typing away. And so this is the example of what the note looks like that we would send once it's completed to your family doctor or other people involved in your care, and to go in your chart long term so that other people can understand what your care has been like over time, and also so that your neurologist can remember all the details from your last appointment. And so I just made a little bit of a video showing you some of the specific fields that we ask neurologists to complete, and to explain that if you consent to the study, all of this information is downloaded or can be manually downloaded into a secure database. Of course, for people that don't consent, we collect this information. It just isn't moved into the database. Okay, so for this particular person, at the end of the visit, you have a chance to select the diagnosis. So in this case, it's MS, and then the MS type is relapsing remitting. And then now, I'm dragging this over. I'm asked to enter the date that symptoms started. So in this case, June 26th, and now they're being diagnosed very quickly on October 1st. And so that information makes it in the note. It's helpful for everyone that's involved in your care. And then this is data that's example of the type of information that will make its way into the registry. Okay, and so I mentioned that we also ask for consent to use your MRI images. And I will say there's a number of researchers here at the university that benefit from your consent for MRI images. So Dr. Yang has a really interesting research program using advanced machine learning techniques where she is trying to predict using someone's MRI image whether someone is likely to develop a progressive form of MS down the road, as well as predict whether people will respond to specific types of MS treatments. So it's very interesting research. And then Dr. Bruce Pike uses a special technique with MRI, kind of reprocessing the images that allows him to see whether or not the neurons are remyelinating. And using some of the clinical data I just talked about to look at what sort of factors in terms of, treatment age, lesion location, are associated with someone or a particular lesion remyelinating more or remyelinating less. And then Dr. Jeffrey just recently joined the university. And so her long-term interest is actually looking at a treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation as a treatment for fatigue. So I'm very excited for that future line of research. At the moment, she is using MRI images, just looking at a specific area in the brain to see what proportion of people with MS have lesions in the area where they anticipate that device will be placed. So just three very recent examples of how MRI images have been used to advance MS research. So you also see in the consent form consent to linkage of your administrative health data. And so that's a fancy way of saying that the government essentially collects a lot of healthcare information because doctors and other healthcare providers bill the province when they see patients. And so that means that the province's information on everyone's prescription medications, types of healthcare problems they have, if they go to the emergency department or admitted to hospital, or when people are seen in clinic. And so we can actually use this information to advocate, for example, for important healthcare resources. So sorry, this is not a great picture. This is from a study I did actually with Dr. Metz when I was a resident. And we used administrative healthcare data to basically show the benefit of being seen in a multidisciplinary MS clinic. So a clinic where there's nursing and physiotherapy and social work and other supports. And what we found is that here in Calgary, where 99% of people with MS will see someone in an MS clinic, emergency department, 36% of people that in that MS clinic will go to the emergency department over a 2-year period. Now in Edmonton, it's quite different. There's not as many people, well, it's changing, but at the time this was done, not as many people were actually seeing neurologists as part of MS clinics. They were just seeing them sort of in separate general neurology clinics. And what we found is that, a larger proportion of people who didn't attend an MS clinic went to the emergency department compared to those that did attend MS clinics. And so that probably tells us that the extra nursing support and other allied health that we're able to provide people seen in an MS clinic probably reduce healthcare costs through reducing emergency department visits. And so this is an example of a study we do to advocate for better healthcare services for people living with MS using this type of data. Okay, so that's sort of passive collection of data, which, as I said, if that's all you have time for in your life, that is still hugely impactful to allow researchers to do that. If you do have time, there is also sort of an active arm of SINS, and a big part of that involves completion of questionnaires. And so I just want to explain why we want to use questionnaires. And my biggest answer to that is we want to measure what matters. And some of you may have heard this term EDSS. Every neurologist appointment, you may not be aware, but this is essentially a score that's calculated based on what your neurological exam looks like and questions that you're asked about things like how your bladder's functioning and concerns about your memory or low energy. And this information is put together to calculate kind of a scale or a number that estimates your current level of disability. And there even though this is a very widely used way to measure how someone with MS is doing, there are, of course, a lot of criticisms of it. The biggest one being that it's really heavily focused on how much and how far people can walk and what type of, gait aids they need later on to continue ambulating. And so, many studies have been done showing that, patient, like someone living with MS, their EDSS does not really correlate that much with their quality of life, which is really what matters, obviously, to people living with MS. And so we have incorporated questionnaires to try and better measure this. And so there's a number of questionnaires that people enrolled in SIMS are asked to complete on an annual basis, looking at, self-reported disability, not the impression of people's neurologists, looking at measures like fatigue, quality of life, anxiety, depression, and also looking at other factors important that can affect some of these other measures, such as someone's general health, their lifestyle, their personal circumstances. So, how they're currently what their current source of income is, what the overall income of their household is, what kind of social supports people have, and if they're having basic needs, so things like housing security, if they have enough food to eat, and if, which are very important, of course, for the well-being of someone living with MS. Another optional questionnaire that we've introduced this year that I will put a plug if you have not completed it, or if you enroll in SIMS, please, 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 if you're going to complete just one questionnaire, complete this one. This is a bit of a passion project for me because I think a really important goal of research is to identify inequities, meaning avoidable inequalities that are unfair and unjust in the care that people receive for MS. We have had incredible advancements in MS, and it's important to ensure that all Canadians or all people living with MS have equal opportunity to benefit from these treatments and that we're not leaving people behind when we're making these advancements. And so, I should have led with explaining what social determinants of health are. And it's basically, again, it's personal circumstances. So, where someone lives, what they look like, who they love, the conditions they live or grew up in. We know that these have a huge impact on health and healthcare experiences, and it's important to measure these things to advocate and understand how to provide this equal care for everyone. So please think about completing that questionnaire. Okay, so next in the active arm, you will see, if you complete this questionnaire, the option to provide biological samples. And so what that means is basically blood and spinal fluid. And so I will say that we're not actively collecting any biological samples at the moment. So this arm is not particularly relevant other than if you indicate you would be potentially willing to provide, for example, blood in the future should new research questions arise. There are currently researchers using prior blood samples that were collected and then frozen. One researcher is Dr. Camara Lemeroy, who's really interested in what we call the gut-brain axis. So it's this idea that, the balance of the different types of bacteria that live in your gut can actually affect how leaky your gut is and affect the immune system and therefore brain inflammation. And this is a very exciting avenue of MS research that is being conducted using blood samples that people previously provided and that we froze for future research questions. And so I should have probably led with this also, but so the SIM study, as I mentioned, was started by Dr. Loen Metz, who has now moved on to other things. And I'm a fairly new researcher at the University of Calgary. I just started my second year of my position here, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about ways to sort of revitalize and revamp SIMS. And I would say my biggest goal is to make sure that this is patient-oriented research. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what researchers are interested in and what people living with that condition really want to see happen. And, fundamentally, as researchers, we do want to achieve benefits and answer the questions to the people who are actually living with MS, the day in, the day out. And that includes both, people diagnosed with MS and, their loved ones and caretakers. And so patient-oriented research basically just means putting patients first in the way we think about and design research and studying what matters to most people living with MS. As I've talked about, part of this involves improving health and access to the healthcare system, making the healthcare system better, and including the people in these studies for who the research is designed and learning from and listening to your lived experiences. And so a way that we conduct this patient-oriented research is through recruiting research patient partners. And so a patient research partner is someone who has a lived experience, who is willing to sit at the table with researchers and drive these MS research questions. And so this means, helping us choose which research questions to ask, questions that are going to matter to patients and families, design what the research actually looks like so that it's not too burdensome for patients. When the research project is complete, sometimes we have unexpected findings and we need help interpreting them in a way that's appropriate and has the insight of someone, that's walked in these shoes. And finally, patient research partners can help share the results with the MS community, and that can be through help reviewing materials that researchers produce, sort of like, both educational talks. So, if I had a patient research partner, someone could have reviewed these slides for me and told me what I should have taken out or the things that didn't make sense. But you can all tell me that once I'm done speaking shortly. And sometimes it can involve reviewing grant applications. So I'll tell you, I just submitted a funding proposal to MS Canada, and then any research grant request that I make, their researchers are always required to create a summary to be read by a non-researcher, so someone living with MS, and patient research partners can join the research team to read these summaries and give feedback about what makes sense, if it makes sense, if wording needs to be changed. It's extremely valuable. And a lot of patients are joining research teams now, and I think it's really important that the understanding is that this is not, putting a patient on a research team just for, the sake of checking a box or it sounds nice. It's important that this is, a meaningful and active collaboration, sitting at the table, talking about, how can we make sure that the people that, we recruit a representative sample, people that we are reaching everyone with MS, in a way that we're not leaving certain groups of people out, or that everyone can hear about this study. Everyone can be part of this study if they wish to. And I emphasize this a lot, sitting and talking about, is this actually a study that studies issues that matter to people living with MS? Could participating in this study be too burdensome? Are the study materials and the consent forms easy to understand? These are all important issues that researchers need a lot of help with. And sort of, best principles for researchers looking to have patient research partners is, it's important to have, in theory, multiple patients involved per project. I think it's really important that people have peers on any research committees to, kind of talk in the corners, should we say something? Does this person know this doesn't make any sense? So it's sort of helpful to have a peer, but then it also, you want to include multiple people so that you can include diverse voices. So people of different age, of different gender, of different ethnicity. And, I will say that often there is an opportunity now in grants to build in financial compensation, meaning that if people are interested, that there's opportunities for researchers to pay people for their time, or provide recognition through, having patient partners be authors on research studies and scientific presentations, because again, these contributions are hugely valuable. And yes, I think that's all I formally have to say. I just wanted to say to everyone here that your voice and your participation will shape the future of MS research. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for considering participating in research. This is the email here on the screen for the Calgary MS Research Program where you can feel free to send any questions. And then there is a barcode on the screen that you can scan if you haven't already joined Sims. Please consider doing so. We'd be really, really happy to have your contribution. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you all.
That was fantastic, Dr. Roberts. What a great overview of all the important things that we can do through research. It's so true. We always just think of research as clinical trials, and although they are important, there's so many other questions to answer that you can't get with standard, randomized clinical trials. So this is really great.